Hello and welcome to the RealTime Fantasy Sports Show. I'm Jeff Power, senior writer with RealTime Fantasy Sports, joined by Logan Glaser once again. Logan, how are you doing today?
Doing good. How are you?
Not too bad. Good to have you back on the show this
Yeah,
week.
we've got a good primetime game tonight. Finally.
I think so. I hope so. It's Bengals at Ravens. It should be a good game. The Ravens kind of disappointed last week, losing to the Browns, kind of a bit of a surprise, but this is definitely a good one on paper at least.
For sure, yeah. And we got a Super Bowl preview or past Super Bowl preview Monday night. From last year, we got Eagles at KC. That should also be another good one. Finally getting some good primetime games.
Yeah, I think that's the game of the week. I'm really looking forward to that one. Should be a tremendous game. Eagles Chiefs could be a Super Bowl preview again this year. Two of the best teams in the league for sure. That should be a tremendous game. Most definitely, Logan. I think we actually do have some good primetime ones for once, which is great to see. So on today's show, Logan and I, we like to preview all the games. We talk about them all, and we do a different category each week. This week, we're going to do our favorite pick'em play. So we have great pick'em contests here on our site, RealTime Fantasy Sports. Go to rtsports.com. Under that daily tab, you will see the icon pick'em. So click on that, and you can sign up for these games. Logan, can you explain to our users a little bit about the game? How it
Yeah,
works?
for sure. So for Pick'em, you'll choose more or less on players' projections. The more players you add to your slip, the more you'll win. If you go 2 for 2, you'll win 3 times. 3 for 3, you'll win 6 times. 4 for 4, 10 times. You can go up to 40 times by going 6 for 6. With that, you can also add in the option for a mulligan, where if you do lose one of them, you still get paid out. It's just a lesser amount overall with that. You can also do pick or play as well, where you go head to head with another, like Lamar versus Burrow, and then you can select who you think will have more points between that and get a win by that. And newly added this week is NHL. So NHL is now up and pick 'em. The most common one is shots on goal with NHL. You can also do player points, goalie saves. So that's brand new on that pick 'em. So go check that out.
Yeah, I've not done the NHL yet. That sounds fun too, though. We have all the
Absolutely.
sports, NBA as well, don't we?
Yeah, we've got NBA, PGA, NFL, MLB, lots of different contests to choose from with
It's
that.
become really popular, and not only when we go over these pick'em, you'll see that it pertains to fantasy as well. So if you're like, oh, I don't want to listen everybody talk about pick'em all day, but it definitely pertains to fantasies when we're talking
For
about these
sure. And I
players.
would say, yeah, it's probably the most popular contest on our site after NFL drafts wrap up. Right after that season starts, it's definitely the most popular feature on our site. Tons of users have been using it. Lots and lots of big winners that we have seen with that 40 times.
Yeah, exactly. You can hit big if you can hit on that. Hopefully, we're going to help you do that today as well. Like I said, though, definitely pertains to fantasy also. So you want to play these guys in your fantasy lineups or fade them as well, because some of the times we're going to say less with some of these picks. Although I have more than less. I don't know about you.
Yeah, for sure. Usually it's about 80 to 20 with people choosing more, just because it's more fun to choose the more. You don't want to be cheering for someone not to get yardage, but yeah, so I definitely have a mixture of both. I would probably say mine's more towards like 70-30 with the more, but
Gotcha. And also, feel free if you have any questions at all during the stream today, put them in the chat. We're happy to answer them. If you have any lineup questions, start, sit, trade questions, add, drop, waiver wire stuff, we're more than happy to talk about that as well. So feel free to put that in the chat. So Logan, let's jump into it. You teased it already. Bengals at Ravens. Bengals 5-4 at the Ravens 7-3. Could be a really crucial game for the Bengals, because if they lose this one, they're sitting at 5-5, and that AFC is really good. First of all, thoughts on the game? Do you think the Bengals win this one on the road, or do you like the Ravens?
I've got the Ravens just at home. I think they're one of the most dominant teams in the NFL. They let last week slip away. I think they're going to be upset about that. I do think it's a big game for both teams, though. When you look at the AFC, it is compact, it's stacked. Right now, Bengals are looking on the outside, but they're only 2 games back from the Ravens. So if Ravens drop this game, then they're looking right on that borderline as well. So it is a very big game. I think this is going to be a high-scoring game as well. So I do think a lot of points are going to be scored in this game. The player I'm going to be going with, though, for my pick and play is Odell Beckham Jr., more than 26.5 receiving yards.
Okay.
His last 4 games, he's crushed that number. Last week, he only had one reception, though, which is a bit concerning, but that was a 40-yard touchdown. His last 4 games, he's gone 40, 56, 49, and 34 yards. So I like him to hit that over on 26.5.
I could see that definitely. Could be a higher scoring game than I think people think as well. Both these defenses are pretty good, but the offenses are really good as well. My pick is Joe Mixon of the Bengals, more than 45.5 rushing yards. So they're really beat up at receiver still. T. Higgins is out. Jamar Chase is battling a back injury. He'll play, but he could be less than 100%. So I think they might lean on Mixon a little more. Ravens have also allowed 129 plus rushing yards 3 of the last 5 games. So I like Joe Mixon more than 45.5 rushing yards. And for the game, I'm going to say the Bengals win this one on the road. Should be a great game, though. I'm going with the upset here as well.
Yeah, that's a big call.
Yeah, Browns won last week. I think the Bengals will win this week as well. They're playing really good football. All right, we already have a question in the chat. We'll get to that right now. Ty Chandler or Najee Harris in the Scott Fish Bowl. I'm assuming that's what SFB stands for. Can't believe I'm asking this question. It's a good question, though. I have my thoughts. What about you? I know they named Jaylen Warren the starter last week, kind of let that leak this week, but Harris still got a lot of work. Who do you lean towards here?
Honestly, I think this is a pretty even toss-up on who to pick. I honestly might go Ty Chandler. Just because of matchup purposes. I think the Steelers have a very hard matchup this week at Cleveland. Cleveland's front line has been amazing so far in this season. Ty Chandler's got a good matchup against Denver, and that Minnesota offense has been moving the ball. We saw him get work when Madison got hurt with that concussion. So I mean, you can't go wrong either way, but I think I would lean towards Chandler.
So in the Scott Fish Bowl, you get points for first downs and big plays and different stuff like that. So I think Chandler is a little more intriguing in that format. I think Harris is the safe play. So despite him not starting, he still has double-digit fantasy points 4 straight games. He's still getting a lot of volume. He has 16 carries each of his last 2 games. So while he isn't starting, he's still getting work. I think he's the safer play, but Chandler's the guy that could score bigger. So if you want to go that route,
I agree with that.
And you want to take some more chances, I think I'd go Chandler. If you want to play it safe, if you're not in the playoffs, I'm actually sitting in the playoffs right now in the Scott Fish Bowl. I'm proud to say my record's not great, but I am actually up there in points scored. So I'm in the playoffs. It's the last week for Scott Fish Bowl before the playoffs start, hoping I can continue to hold on to a playoff spot there. Just a great contest, a great cause as well. Raises a lot of money for charity. Scott Fish does just awesome stuff there. All right. Next game, Logan. Cowboys 6-3 at the Panthers 1-8. This could be a bit of a snoozer. I think the Cowboys are going to win big here. What's your thoughts there?
For sure, yeah, I kind of think the same with that defense going up against Bryce Young, who's had a couple of sloppy turnovers. I wouldn't be surprised if Dallas defense does find the end zone in this game. With that guy I'm going with, though, it's a bit surprised, and that's going to be Tony Pollard, more than 15.5 fantasy points. So his last 3 games, he's really struggled fantasy points-wise, 6, 9, and 5. But I think they get him the ball and try to get him going this game. They kind of rested him last game just because they had a blowout win over the Giants, but I think they get him going this game. So I think he finds the end zone. He hasn't found the end zone since week 1. But I like him to find in over 15.5 fantasy points.
Yeah, I think the spread in this one was 10.5. I thought it might be higher. I think the Cowboys cover that because, like you said, I don't know if the Panthers can score against them. Their offensive line's horrible. The receivers don't get any separation, so I'm just staying away from that offense. I like Tony Pollard as well to get some points, but I still think he's going to have less than 69.5 rushing yards. So I think he'll get his catches, might score a touchdown, but I'm not sure he tops that total of rushing, so that's my pick here. He hasn't topped that 6 straight games. I think the Cowboys could get up big while Pollard could score early in the game and get those fantasy points that you're looking for, Logan. I think Rico Dowdle could get some work late, so
yeah,
I'm kind of steering clear of Pollard when it comes to these rushing yards. I like him less than 69.5. Next game, this is another good one. Steelers 6-3 at the Browns 6-3. Division rivals, Dorian Thompson Robinson starts this week. Rookie quarterback because Deshaun Watson's out for the year because of his shoulder injury. Do you think the Browns can win this game even without Watson, or do you think the Steelers upset here?
Yeah, so I believe Browns are now favored by 1 point in this game. I believe the line was around 4 with
Okay, move.
Watson in and with him out. Browns are still favored to win this game by 1 point. I do think it's going to be a low-scoring game. I think the Steelers have – I think both sides have a good defense, and I think both offenses are going to struggle a little bit. Um,
Who's
with that.
who's
And
your
I'm
pick
going
and
Najee
play?
Harris less than 41.5 rush yards. As you mentioned, Jalen Warren's getting a little bit more involved. He's just so much electric when he gets the
Yeah.
ball. And it's a completely different tempo than when Najee Harris gets it because he's looking for those 2-3, just move the ball a couple of yards on those short downs with that. So I'm going to go with the less than 41.5 rush yards.
This is one of my few less ones as well. I like the Browns to win this at home despite the rookie QB starting. I still think that defense is really good, and I don't trust the Pittsburgh offense. I think they're going to run the ball, try to run the ball a lot. So I'm worried about their passing game. I have George Pickens less than 35.5 receiving yards. That's a really low number, but still, he's been so boomer bust. He's failed to top 50 yards 3 straight games. He just isn't getting it done. The Browns, first overall against the pass, allowed the 3rd fewest fantasy points to receivers. So I'm worried about him in this matchup. I think the Browns win at home in a low-scoring game, and I don't think the Steelers have much success throwing the ball. All right, we got a couple more questions up here, Logan. A trade question there. Trade Andrews, Mixon, James Cook for Kelsey and Jacobs. What do you think there?
Yeah, so
Oh,
his question with that is it enough to
it
veto
vetoed.
it? Which I do not think so. I think when you look for a veto, it has to be clear collusion with that. I think it's perfectly fine as long as both teams can make a stand for why it's improving their team. So I think that's perfectly fine. I do think I lean a little bit. It's hard because I would almost go. I think Andrews and Kelsey are about the same because Kelsey hasn't been great this year so
It's
far.
true.
He's had a couple of games here and there, but he's had a lot of low-scoring games with that. And then Jacobs for Mixon and James Cook, I think that's perfectly fine. So across the board, I think it's a pretty even trade. Which side would I rather have, though? It's
That's
a
a good
toss-up.
question. It kind of depends how your team stands. I think if you want to make an upgrade at running back and you're going to start Jacobs, I'd rather go that way. But if you need depth at running back and you don't really have a good one running back number 2, I think getting Mixon and Cook is a good move because it gives you a little more depth there. So it just kind of seems how your roster's stacked. Overall, I'd probably still like Kelsey and Jacobs. I think Jacobs is set up for a really good finish, but I'm okay with the other side as well because you're getting more depth at running back, if that
For
makes
sure.
sense. All right, let's go to the next game then. Bears at the Lions. Bears 3-7. Likely get Justin Fields back this week. Lions are rolling at 7-2. Had a big win last week. I think the Lions win big here at home, even with Fields returning. I don't know. I'm guessing you feel the same way.
Yep, I feel the exact same way. The player I'm going to choose for this is Darnell Mooney over 27.5 receiving yards. And kind of like we mentioned, game script with this, I think Detroit's offense has just been on fire. I mean, they scored every single time they basically touched the ball against the Chargers last week, just following
Yeah.
that game along. Yeah, I mean, whenever they got the ball, you're like, here's another touchdown. With that, they put up 41 points. Mooney's gone over this number 6 of the 7 times so far in the last 7 games with that. It might be a little bit more concerning that Fields is back at quarterback just because he rushes the ball a little bit more. So they might not be going through the air as much, but I do think they're going to be down early. So they'll have to turn towards the passing game with that.
Yeah, game script definitely matters when it comes to these pick'em contests. So a pick like that, I think, is really good. And I like the Lions and the Lions to win big. And Jahmyr Gibbs, I thought this was a little surprising. His rushing total was set at 37.5. So I really like him for more than that. The return of David Montgomery last week really didn't hurt Gibbs much. Gibbs still played 58% of the snaps compared to 38% for Montgomery. He had a big day rushing the ball. I think Gibbs is still going to be heavily involved, even with Montgomery back. He's actually first overall in fantasy running back scoring his last 3 games. Bears, they allow the 10th most fantasy points of running backs this year. They've struggled against the run. I think this is my favorite pick of the week. Gibbs more than 37.5 rushing yards. All right, let's look at another question over here. We'll kind of go back and forth when we do these. So next one, quick question. Offered Bijan Robinson and Deontay Johnson for Montgomery and D-Hop. Currently 6-4, worried that Gibbs will get even more touches.
I think I'm taking that. I'm taking Bijan on that side in Deontay Johnson. I do think Gibbs is going to get more touches than we saw at the first half of the season, just because he made the most of his opportunity with Montgomery out. He was a top 5 running back with Montgomery out. So I do think he's going to lean towards more touches. I do think Montgomery is going to get the goal line work, though, still with that offense. We saw kind of last week Gibbs got the touches inside the last 5, but I think that's going to be Montgomery's roles going forward with that. So I do think Montgomery's still going to be a starter for you in fantasy, but it's just too hard to pass up with Robinson. When Robinson does get the carries, he's a top running back. It's just the question if he does get those carries with Arthur Smith.
I agree. I think Montgomery could be more boomer bust going forward with the situation. Like you said, could be a little more touchdown dependent. They're going to score a lot, though. So I still think that he has value, but I like Bijan going forward. I just think he could get a lot more touches. Like you said, it's just what Arthur Smith wants to do with him. But it sounds like he wants to get him more involved. So I'm intrigued by Gibbs going forward, and I'm intrigued by Bijan going forward as well.
And a question that just came in, I do think Gibbs will have more touches than Montgomery moving forward, kind of like what we were just talking about. So I do think it's going to be probably 60-40 Gibbs in that backfield, but Montgomery is going to have that goal line work as well.
Yep. I agree. It was like that last week. 58% of the snaps for Gibbs last week, 38% for Montgomery. So that showed me that they have a little more faith in Gibbs than they did earlier in the season, and a good sign for him going forward. So we'll want to definitely keep an eye on those snap counts going forward. But at this point, I do think Gibbs has the upper hand. All right, next game, Chargers 4-5 at the Packers 3-6. Chargers just a bit of a mess. Fired. No, they didn't fire anybody, did they? No, that was the Bills. I was thinking they should fire Brandon Staley, is what I should say. I am not a fan of him at all. I don't think he's going to last long if they don't miss a play.
I saw a rumor that Bill Belichick was going to be the favored.
I saw that
the
too.
Chargers after this year. We'll see if that happens. But
would that be good for their fantasy value? Because I'm not sure he's going to have Kellen Moore as his offensive coordinator, which scares me a little bit. He obviously he's had some huge offenses in the past, though, so I guess we shouldn't be too scared with that. All right. First of all, the game in this one, I think the Chargers are going to win on the road. The Packers team just does not impress me. I don't know if you feel the same way. But
I'm kind of the same way. It just you get what you get with the Packers and their offense right now. I do think their offense does improve a little bit with Aaron Jones kind of fully healthy again.
That's true.
So that definitely does help them. They lost last week to Pittsburgh with that, but it's just hard to look at Jordan Love and say, I'm picking him to win this week over Justin Herbert.
Very true. Very true. Who's your pick and pick for this play?
So speaking of that, I'm going to go with less than for Keenan Allen. So less than 85.5 receiving yards. I just think that it's a very high number for Keenan Allen. I know that they don't have many receiving options with that, but Keenan Allen's battling a shoulder injury. And even though he has been one of the top 5 fantasy receivers so far this year, he's only hit over 85.5 yards once in the last 6 games, which is pretty remarkable when you look up his fantasy numbers. And he's just a PPR machine, has also found the end zone a lot, but he's not gone over 85 yards much. So I'm going to go with the less on that.
So, again, this is kind of game script for me. I think the Packers are going to get down, have to throw the ball more. I like Romeo Doubs more than 35.5 receiving yards. He had 36 yards last week. He's topped that 35.5 number 4 times this season. Chargers are dead last against the pass. They allow 315.7 passing yards per game. Only team in football that allows more than 300 passing yards per game. So, I think Love could have some success throwing the ball here, and I like Doubs to top that 35.5 receiving yard mark. I actually like Jaden Reed a lot this week. Unfortunately, he was not listed as an option on our pick 'em play for anything, so that's why I didn't pick him here, and I went with a different Packer receiver. All right, Logan, let's do another question. Nino has a question here. He says, is Diggs and Brees an overpay for Gibbs, Pittman, and Addison?
I think it's a little bit of an overpay. It's not a crazy overpay. But I think I would prefer the Diggs and Brees side, just personally. Again, it also has to do with your roster construction if you need the depth with that. But I think Addison's going to take a little bit of a hit with Justin Jefferson coming back. It's still up in the air if he's going to play this week. I know they wanted him to be fully healthy, but I definitely think he takes a bit of a hit with that. And then with Gibbs, you also have Montgomery back in the mix, kind of like we talked about him for a little bit. So
I do like Gibbs more than Brees Hall going forward, just because I look at the offenses. You want somebody in the Jets offense or the Lions offense? I want the Lions offense. The issue for me is Diggs is a pretty big upgrade over Pittman and Addison. So I like Pittman probably more than most. I think he's been a little underrated this year. He's had a very good season, especially with Gardner Minshew as a starter. But Diggs is an elite number one. I mean, he's a top 5 fantasy option. So I do think you're overpaying a little bit there for those options. So I probably lean Diggs and Brees as well. But if you can get Gibbs a different way for Brees, I would look into doing that. All right, let's do the next game, Logan. Cardinals 2-8 at the Texans 5-4. Kyler Murray returned last week, won the game. Not a very exciting game. It wasn't the most clean game in the world, despite
it definitely wasn't the most clean game. It did have an exciting ending.
It did. You're right. You're right.
Game-winning field goal by Prater with that. There was lots of field goals going back and forth with that.
Yeah, a
Prater
lot
was
of
definitely
stalls
great
in the
for fantasy.
Yeah, a lot of stalls in the red zone. I was encouraged by Murray running the ball, though. He looked good. I mean, that one scramble he had when he ran like 20 yards backwards, and then he
It was
10 yards
that won them the
forward.
game.
So,
It was 3rd and 10 with under
yep,
a minute to go. That won them the game with that run. So that was very encouraging to see.
it was. So I don't think that ACL's an issue anymore, which is good news for me, and that's why you'll see my pick here in a second. But I like the Texans at home here, even with Murray back. Texan team's playing really good. CJ Stroud's really good, so that's why I like in this matchup. Who do you like, and who's your pick?
Yeah,
as well?
I think we kind of agree on how this game is going to work and kind of our play with this. So my play is going to be Kyler Murray over 241 passing yards with that. Last week he had 249 against Atlanta. I think Houston has a worse defense than Atlanta, but I think this is going to be a high-scoring game. I still think Houston wins this, but I do think a lot of points are going to be scored in this game from both sides. So I like the over on Murray's passing.
I agree. Same thing. I think there's going to be a lot of points, a lot of fantasy points in this one, get people involved on both sides. I like Kyler Murray now for more than 21.8 fantasy points. He had 20.75 fantasy points last week in the season debut. That was against a pretty good Falcons pass defense, so they're rated in the top half of the league. Texans, not so much. They're 25th against the pass, 15th most fantasy points to quarterbacks allowed for the season. I think Murray tops that 21.8 fantasy point mark, and I'm looking for him to be a good low-end number one for fantasy teams for this week. All right, let's do another question here. I'm trying to scroll back to them there. Oh, it's a tight end one. Cade Otton, Tyler Conklin, or Pat Freiermuth this week replacing Dallas Goedert. I think those are 3 really similar options. I know who I might lean. I'll let you go first, though.
Yeah, I think I lean towards Cade Otton. I don't love his fantasy matchup this week against San Francisco. They just look so dominant last week against Jacksonville with that. I do think he's got the most upside with that. So I think I'm going to go Cade Otton still, even though I don't love his matchup this week.
I'm the same way. I don't mind the matchup as much. San Francisco has allowed some passing yards this year. Otton's been more involved lately. I think Conklin is intriguing. He has 13 catches his last 2 games, but I just don't trust that offense. I'm sorry. I don't trust it at all. So I like Otton as well. I give him a slight edge over Conklin. I think it's a close call there, though. If you have a preference with Conklin, you can go for it. But for me, I like Otton just a little more. All right. Next game on the slate, Logan. Titans 3-6, Jags 6-3. I think the Jags are going to roll here at home. Will Levis has played pretty well since taking over the starting role, but kind of slowed down a little bit the last 2 games. I'm just not sure that offense is going to score enough to keep up with the Jags. So I like the Jags to win this game at home. What do you think?
Yeah, I kind of agree the same way. There's been bright spots in Levis's game,
Yep.
but you see when you watch him play that he needs a full year under his belt to kind of move forward with him. So I think they're just going to give him the reps the rest of the season with that. I think they're going to they basically know that they're out of playoff contention this year. You can kind of assume that. So I'm going to go with Jacksonville in this game, but I'm going to go with Trevor Lawrence less than 1.5 touchdowns thrown. So only one time in the last 8 games, Lawrence has thrown for more than 2 touchdowns, which was very surprising to me. I think that was one of the most surprising stats that I've seen, and that Jacksonville offense has kind of struggled recently. Just getting Ridley involved has not been non-existent. Kirk has clearly been their number 1 wide receiver so far on this season, and Etienne's had a lot of touchdowns scored as he's one of the top fantasy running backs so far, and they've really relied on him inside the 5 with that. So it's definitely taken away from Lawrence's touchdowns so far.
Yeah, Lawrence has got to be one of the biggest busts of the year, unfortunately. He just has not been very good for fantasy teams. The Jags are still winning games, but he needs to get better. I see some growth at times, but I just thought he would be a lot further along than he is, unfortunately. So I don't mind that call at all that you have there. So mine's actually it's another game script one because I think the Titans are going to be losing. They have to throw the ball more. I like DeAndre Hopkins for more than 58.5 receiving yards. He didn't do much last week, but he was still targeted 8 times in that game. So I think that's really encouraging. He's 12th in fantasy receiver scoring his last 3 games. He shows a better rapport with Will Levis than he did Ryan Tannehill. Jags also just 29th against the pass. They allow 277.9 passing yards per game. So I like Hopkins to do well in this matchup. All right, another question. We have another one where someone traded. It was, where'd it go? I was just looking. Oh,
Jameson Williams.
Yeah, traded Jameson Williams in the number 1 pick in 2024 in Dynasty for Josh Jacobs. Where do you rank Jacobs right now among running backs, and do you expect his workload to continue?
I mean, I would put him in the top 10 running back for sure with that. I think I would put him in that 5 to 10 area. I think he does have a little bit more value in Dynasty with that. It kind of depends on where that number 1 pick in 2024 is going to end up being to know if that trade was worth it.
But in Dynasty too, you don't know who's going to be available, so it's probably a keeper league. So I mean, Jacobs is probably definitely worth it. I'm fine with the trade. Jameson Williams has not impressed me much. I actually think Jacobs is definitely top 5 going forward the rest of this season. He's really picked it up since a slow start, and they're featuring him getting the ball. He has 25 plus carries each of his last 2 games. I wish he would get a few more catches, though. His catches aren't great. He has just 5 catches the last 4 games. So if he got a little more work in the passing game, I think he could really be an elite guy, an elite player the rest of the way. But either way, I think he's definitely a top 5 fantasy back the rest of the season. I think he's going to be one of the elite guys compared to what's out there as well. I mean, you look at the workload, there's not many backs that have gotten that much work, and I think it's really encouraging for him. And Better Boss just said his team is good, so it won't be a high draft pick. So yeah, totally fine with the trade. I think it was a good trade. You get a good number 1 back for the rest of the season. Good work there. All right, let's do another question. We're kind of I don't want to get too far behind. Also, would you start Devin Singletary against the Cardinals if Pierce is out, or start James Conner?
That's a tricky one because it's both running backs in the same game in which I think a lot of points will be scored. I think if I had to choose one, I would choose James Conner just because of the PPR upside with that. As we saw last week, Singletary did have 30 carries, which was a lot, but he really lacked in that reception category. He did manage a touchdown, though.
I agree. I favor Conner just slightly over Singletary. I still don't totally trust the Texans running game. I know he got to work last week, but still, I just don't know if I totally trust that running game just yet. Unfortunately, I'm okay with starting him, but I think I would go with Conner over Singletary at this point. Conner didn't catch a pass last week, unfortunately, but he usually gets more work in the passing game. All right, let's do the next game. Logan, Raiders at the Dolphins. Raiders 5-5, playing better football under new coach Antonio Pierce. At the Dolphins 6-3. Dolphins coming out of a bye week. I'm always intrigued by that. I think they usually get set up pretty well, teams that do that. So I like them to win this game. And Raiders have had some easy games the last couple of weeks to get their wins. So this is a much tougher matchup on the road. So I think the Dolphins could win and win big here.
Yep, for sure. And this sets up perfectly for the Dolphins where they crush the bad teams and lose to the good teams. And this is going to be one of those games. I think that they will win by 2 or more touchdowns. I believe the spreads is around 13
Yep.
last I saw in this game. I'm going to go with Tua, more than 22.1 fantasy points. I just don't trust the Raiders defense, and I think that Miami's going to put up a lot of points against them. Tua has been averaging 22.5 fantasy points so far in the season, so his average is over that threshold, along with at home against a bad defense. So I like the over on that.
Yeah, I like the Dolphins to rack up a lot of points here. I'm kind of intrigued by Devin Achane this week. I hope he plays, and it looks like he should play. All signs point to it. Are you playing him if you have him on your roster?
Yeah, I feel comfortable starting him depending on my other options. Most likely you have good options if you have him just because he was a late round draft pick. What I was actually looking at this week is how scared I am to have Miami going into fantasy playoffs. So weeks 15 through 17, they play the Jets, Cowboys, and Baltimore, three
Ouch.
really good defenses. So I was kind of looking around in all my leagues, and I'm trying to trade all of my Miami players just because I do not want them on my lineup coming towards the fantasy playoffs.
I did not realize they had that tough of a schedule in the playoffs. That's
So those are probably the three hardest games that you could.
There's obviously a lot of teams are going to have a lot of the top teams in the league are going to have Tyreek Hill on it. I'll tell you that right now because he's had a monster season, and Raheem Mostert's the same way. He's carried a lot of teams as well. So
a lot of teams will have them, and they got a brutal schedule. So just something to keep in mind for all you listeners that's a hard schedule.
Yep. All right, I like the Dolphins here to roll, but again, I think the Raiders are going to get down and have to throw the ball. So I like Devontae Adams more than 66.5 receiving yards. He had 13 targets last week. I'm really encouraged by that. His 86 yards were also the second highest total of the season. Dolphins likely to be up big. I think Adams is going to get a lot of chances again. And Antonio Pierce mentioned after the game, he's like, you got to get the ball to your best players. That's why we made it a point to get so much targets to Adams, so many targets to Adams in that game. So I think he's going to get a lot of work again this week. So I like him a lot there. All right, let's look at the questions here. Someone said Rico Dowdle is a must start this week. I don't know if he's a must start. You got to look at what your league is, but I do like him this week. I think he could be a good play for sure. Someone else said, let's get a lot of points tonight. I hear you there. Good morning to you as well. Here's another question, though. Due to the buys, I have to play Zach Charbonnet at running back. Should I drop him and play Antonio Gibson, Khalil Herbert, or Tyjae Spears? So I think those are four really similar choices, and it's kind of a preference thing. I don't have one that really stands out to me. Do you have any that you prefer out of those plays there, Logan?
Yeah, I think for just a week basis, I'm going to go with Antonio Gibson to score the most this week. But I think the others are a better stash plays like Spears and Charbonnet, just in case the starter does go down. I think they've got more value moving forward. So if you could stash one of those on your bench and play Antonio Gibson is the way I would kind of go with that.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I totally agree with you. Gibson has 5 catches each of his last 3 games, so that really helps his fantasy floor. He has double-digit fantasy points 2 straight games. So I think Gibson is the best play out of those options for this week, but long-term value, Charbonnet and Spears definitely the better of those backs, in my opinion. Definitely. All right, let's do another game, Logan. Giants 2-8 at the Commanders 4-6. This might be one of the worst games of the week, in my opinion. Giants are just brutal to watch. Holy cow.
It's bad.
No words.
It's bad.
Yeah. I'm picking Washington.
I think everyone's going to be picking Washington in that game. It'd be different if Daniel Jones was at quarterback, but with him hurt, Tyrod Taylor hurt, it's a mess over there. They're looking for next season already.
Yeah, definitely. Who's your pick and play in this?
Yeah, pick and play I'm going to go with is Terry McLaurin over 58.5 receiving yards. He's hit this in 5 of his last 7 games. He's been kind of a focal point in that number 1 wide receiver option for Washington. I do think a lot of points are going to be scored by Washington in this game going up against Giants defense. So I'm going over on that.
I usually am going to steer clear of all Giants if possible, but I don't mind Saquon Barkley here more than 15 fantasy points. He's the only Giant I trust right now. I think he's going to get a ton of work. Commanders allow 27.4 points per game. So I think Giants could actually score a couple touchdowns here, and it's most likely going to be Barkley. So I like him for more than 15 fantasy points. I think this could be a big week for him this week. Maybe I'm going out on a limb there, but I think Barkley's going to play well. All right, let's look at another question. We're going back to the trade question now as I'm going down the list. The one guy who was looking at trying to trade away Diggs, he said, should I try James Conner and Diggs for Pittman and Gibbs instead? So it's a different. So he's trading instead of Breece Hall. He's going to trade James Conner and Diggs for Pittman and Gibbs.
I would like that. I think it's better than I would prefer Breece Hall over James Conner just personally. So I feel comfortable doing that one.
I'm better with that, but still, I want to make sure you have a really good elite number one receiver because you're losing one in Diggs. I think Gibbs is a big upgrade over Conner, so that's good. But if you don't have an elite number one receiver, I'm still not sure I'd do that trade. But if you're sitting good on the bench and you have some good receivers and you can afford to give up Diggs, go ahead and go for it. Someone else asked, would you trade Walker and Thielen for Eckler? I'm assuming Kenneth Walker and Adam Thielen for Eckler.
Yeah, I think I would. I think Thielen's reached his peak.
I agree.
This season, he got off to a great fantasy start. He's kind of struggled the last couple weeks. He put up 10 fantasy points, which isn't bad. It's startable, but it's not what he was doing early in the season. And you're getting a top running back in Eckler coming back, so I like it.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I'm good with doing the trade. Kenneth Walker's been a little more up and down. I think Eckler is going to be more consistent, although that team has been a little inconsistent overall, but it's mostly the defense that's been bad, not the offense. So I think Thielen's reached his peak, like you said. I think he has less than 50 yards, 3 straight games. So he still gets some catches, but he's not really going to be that elite guy anymore going forward, in my opinion, in that offense. It's a bit of a train wreck. All right, let's go to another game, Logan. Buccaneers 4-5 at the 49ers 6-3. 49ers looked absolutely tremendous last week coming out of that bye week. Offense was rolling, got Deebo Samuel back. I think they're going to win here again. Buccaneers 4-5. Been a little bit of a surprise, but I'm not sure they can keep it very close here. I like the 49ers to win big.
Yep, I'm the exact same way with that. My pick for this is going to be Rachaad White, less than 44.5 rush yards. I think San Francisco is going to get out to an early lead. It's going to force Tampa Bay to throw the ball. White's only gone over 3 of the last 8 games with that. So stats say that he's going to be on the left side with that, along with the game script of that. So I'm going to go less than White, 44.5 rush yards.
I could see that. I'm still starting him because of his catching, though. He's going to catch
the
ball.
Absolutely.
Yep. That's a good call in the rushing yards, though. So I like Brandon Ayuk for more than 66.5 receiving yards. He found the end zone for the second time this season last week. He has double-digit fantasy points 4 straight games. He hit the 100-yard mark 3 times this season. He's had some big games. Tampa also 31st overall against the pass. They're pretty good against the run. They're kind of like the Tampa defense of old where they've shut down the run, but they can't stop the pass. So I think the 49ers rack up the passing yards in this one. I like Ayuk for more than 66.5 receiving yards. All right, let's look at another question here, Logan. Dak versus Lamar this week. That's a really tough one. I think that's a bit of a coin flip. Who do you favor?
Yeah, I agree. I'm going to go Lamar just based on the game. I think that's going to be a back and forth game between Cincinnati and Baltimore with that, which I love as a quarterback. You want those close games and high scoring games with that. Whereas, like with the Dallas game, they could be up 28-0 at halftime and they just rush the ball. Kind of like they did last week against the Giants. You saw lots of points early with that. And then you bring in the backup, you just run the ball to keep the clock moving. So I like Lamar just because it's going to be a closer game.
I think it actually is. You can go either way here. I'm probably going to actually lean Prescott just because he's been so great lately. 30-plus fantasy points, 3 straight games, while Lamar's been the exact opposite. I think he has less than 20 points, 3 straight games. Yeah, that's right. He has less than 18 points, 3 straight games. So he hasn't been nearly as good lately. I do think it's going to be a closer game. I do think the Cowboys could win big. So that is a little bit of a concern, but still, I might lean Prescott here. It's a close call, though. I think you can make a case for both.
Yeah, it just depends who finds the end zone for the Cowboys, if it's going to be a passing touchdown or a rushing touchdown. That's all it really comes down to.
Yeah, I agree. So next question on here is I'm in a full PPR trying to decide my starting lineup. Receivers or Jefferson, Debo, Godwin, Noah Brown, Jacoby Myers, Deontay Johnson, running back Swift, Pollard, and Singletary. So I'm guessing they start 2 running backs, 2 receivers, and a flex. For me, I'll say Swift and Pollard I'm starting. If Jefferson plays, you got to play him. I like
Yeah.
Debo and Godwin as well. Brown's kind of banged up right now. So that's probably the way I'm leaning. And if Jefferson doesn't play, I'll probably play Singletary in the flex there and then use Debo and Godwin as my receivers. Anything
Yeah, I
different
like
there?
that. No matter what, if Jefferson plays, you have to start him.
Yeah,
It's
I don't
just
like Deontay Johnson much this week in that matchup against a really good Browns defense, and he did little last week as well, so he kind of scares me. Jacoby Myers is kind of gone by the wayside too, so that's the way I go. I like Swift, Pollard as your starters with Jefferson and Debo as your starters at receiver and Godwin at the flex, but if Jefferson's out, go with Singletary at the flex. All right, got that one. Let's do another game, Logan. Jets 4-5 at the Bills, 5-5 now. Lost that heartbreaker. Now they fired their offensive coordinator. That's what I was trying to say earlier. I was thinking of the wrong team, but they fired Ken Dorsey. I'm not sure what change that's going to mean for that team going forward. They've definitely underachieved. I think I got to go with the Bills here to win at home, though. I think it could be closer, though, just because that offense is kind of struggling a little bit. The Jets' defense is pretty good. Just not sure
yeah,
the Jets can
it's
score
two
enough.
offenses that are struggling. Two teams are struggling. Have both had high expectations coming this year. Both need a win badly. I am going to go with Buffalo in this, but my pick and play is going to actually be. It might scare some people, but it's going to be Zach Wilson more than 15.7 fantasy points.
Watch
I
out.
just, yeah, yeah, he's been averaging a little under 15. He's around 14.8 fantasy points so far in the year with that, but I think they get that extra one. I do think Buffalo is going to have the lead, which is going to force the Jets to throw the ball. So I'm going to go with that play.
So my pick is actually Breece Hall, more than 56.5 rushing yards. He's the only Jet I'm playing right now. Garrett Wilson has looked better lately, but I still trust Hall the most out of all those options. You're probably going to play him if he's on your team, but Hall actually ran for 127 yards against the Bills earlier this season, so that's encouraging to me. I think they're going to run the ball a lot to keep that Bills offense off the field, so I like Hall for more than 56 and a half rushing yards. All right, another question would be Daniel asks here, would Ford be a better flex option than Deontay Johnson or Ridley in a PPR league? Ford's played pretty well, Jerome Ford. And then you got Ridley, who's all over the map. You never know what's going to happen with him and Deontay Johnson. Would you go with Ford?
Yeah, I think Ford's the safe play here.
Yep.
I would say he's the safe play. If you want to get risky, then I would go with Ridley. I think Ridley has more upside, but I think Ford is the safer play. So if you feel comfortable with the rest of your lineup and you just need a good safe play, then I would go with Ford. If you're projected to lose by a lot, then I would go with a riskier option and go with Ridley in that Jacksonville offense.
Nailed it again, Logan. Same way. Ford had a 100-yard game against the Steelers earlier this season. They haven't been great against the run, but I think his ceiling is a little limited. I don't think he's as exciting as Ridley. Ridley could really boom, but he's also has a much lower floor because he can disappear. So if you want to play it safe, I think Ford's your play. If you want to take a chance, try to go big, I think Ridley is your guy. All right, let's look at the next game. Seahawks at the Rams. Unfortunately, we do not have a pick 'em up for that yet. I think they're kind of waiting to see what happens with Stafford. It looks like he's going to start, though, in my opinion. Let's just talk about the game a little bit, maybe a player we like.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a close game. I believe the last I saw the spread was 1 on this matchup. So Rams coming off a bye week. I think it's going to be a good game.
Yeah, I agree with you. I actually think the Rams might win this game. Seahawks just have not impressed me. I am not a believer. Not a believer in that 6-3 record. Geno Smith's been more like Geno Smith than he has been in the past few years. So I'm a little worried about him there. And I also think the Rams are play well coming out of the bye. I think Kenneth Walker is going to have a big game. He really got it going last week. 127 total yards and a score. He had 19.7 fantasy points, which was his second highest total of the season. The Rams are middle of the road against the run. They allowed 184 rushing yards last week against the Packers. So I think Walker's going to have a big game in this showing. I like him a lot for sure. And Stafford was a full participation in practice yesterday. I think he's going to play, and he's going to play well. All right, Logan, let's look at another question here. Trey McBride or Dalton Kincaid this week? That's a great question. Great question. I think that's a – who do you like, McBride or Kincaid?
Even one. McBride's really stepped up with that Arizona offense with Ertz gone. And it's good matchup. I think it's going to be a lot of points scored. So I might actually go McBride with that. I think that's a little bit crazy to say with Kincaid as being his top draft pick as our tight end, but I'm going to go with McBride.
I think I like McBride a little more too. I both plays though. I have them both as top 10 options this week. I have McBride ranked 6th and Kincaid 7th, so they're right next to each other. Kincaid's matchup's a little tougher against the Jets. They've been pretty good against the pass all year. Like you said, I think McBride could be involved in a more high-scoring game, and Murray definitely made it a point to get him the ball last week, so I thought that was important as well. So I like McBride over Kincaid. All right, let's look at another game. This is the Sunday night game now. We have pick'ems for this one. Vikings at the Broncos. Vikings 6-4 at the Broncos 4-5. Broncos coming off that big win last week, that crazy finish to that game on Monday night. Just absolutely nuts. Vikings rolling a little bit. This is a tough game to pick, in my opinion.
Yeah, as just a neutral football fan, I'm falling in love with the Vikings just because of the Dobbs story. Also, Kevin O'Connell with his speeches that we see all over Twitter just gets you hyped up. So I'm kind of falling in love with the Vikings just as a neutral football fan. I'm going to go with Javonte Williams less than 65.5 rush yards, though. He only 3 of his 7 games so far, he's gone over that number. He's been getting a lot of work in the receiving game with that, and they also have Pirine, and so there's a lot of different options that they have with running back with that. So I'm going to go with less than 67.5 rush yards.
So ironically, I'm doing the exact opposite. I'm looking for receiving. No, not for Williams, but I like them to throw the ball because I don't think they'll be able to run the ball very well either. So I have Cortland Sutton for more than 54.5 receiving yards. So I agree with you. I think they could struggle to run the ball. So I like Sutton to get some chances here. Found the end zone last week. He has 4 straight games with touchdowns, and he has touchdowns all but 2 games this year. And he tied the season high with 11 targets last week. So I think that bodes well to get over that 54.5 receiving mark. Vikings 7th most fantasy points allowed to receivers. So I think Sutton's going to have a big game in this matchup. As for the game, I say the Vikings win a close one, but it should be a really good game. Looking forward to that one. We had a follow-up as well with the owner that asked McBride or Kincaid. So he said, should he play Kincaid to flex over Deontay Johnson? I would.
Yeah, I think I would as well.
Yep, I'm doing that. I would play Kincaid. He's been really consistent lately. Johnson's been more hit or miss. He finds the end zone, Kincaid as well. So I give him the nod there. I would do that. One of the person in the chat's talking about Tanner Hudson's player to keep an eye on. I agree. He's getting more work than your guy Irv Smith, unfortunately. Logan.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Hudson's got to come
Irv Smith did have one good game a couple weeks ago.
Did. I agree. And then another follow-up question with Keaton Mitchell. Will he be plus or minus what Singletary did last week to the Bengals? So I do like Mitchell this week. They talked about getting him more involved in the offense. I don't know how he had just 4 touches last week with the damage he did.
When he gets his touches, he's explosive. It's just the limited amount of touches that he does get in that offense, though.
I mean, it's a short week. Gus Edwards is old and, kind of manage his workload a little more. So I think Mitchell will get more involved this week. I'm hoping he gets double-digit touches. I'm not sure he's going to pass what Singletary did last week, but I'm expecting him to be a fantasy factor this week for sure. All right. Another owner asks, am I crazy to play Singletary over Barkley if Pierce is out? I don't think you're crazy for considering that because Singletary's coming off a huge game and Barkley's been a bust, but I'm still playing Barkley for the reasons I mentioned earlier. Logan, I still think he could have a good game.
Agree. I think both are great fantasy options this week, though, just because I do think that Arizona-Houston game could be one of the highest scoring on the slate. But, yeah, you can't not start Barkley.
Yeah, Barkley is playing a team that allows, like I mentioned, 27.4 points per game. So while the team is a disaster, the Giants, I still think they might actually be able to score a couple points in this one. So I'm going with Barkley here, but you're not crazy for thinking about starting Singletary over him. You got to think about all your options. You got to think about everything when it comes to fantasy, and that's all you're doing as an owner, being diligent. So let's talk about this last game on the slate now, Logan. A great one. Eagles 8-1 at the Chiefs 7-2. Should be a lot of Swifty talk as well. They're talking about Taylor's going to be at the game, and she's
Yeah, we got
actually
the Kelsey brothers
from,
going up against each other again.
so she's actually from Pennsylvania, if you didn't know that. So I think she actually used to be an Eagles fan. So I wonder what
Okay.
her allegiance. I guess it's going to be changed here. What do you think?
Yeah, I think she'll have to be rooting for
Or in
Casey
Chiefs stuff.
with
Yeah.
that game. I do think Kansas City does win this game. I think Philadelphia has just struggled a little bit on defense recently. They've allowed 54 points in the last 2 weeks against Dallas and Washington. That defense just is not as dominant as it was last year. Dallas Goedert is also hurt for this week. Again, you got a healthy Travis Kelce on the other side, which is always a danger with that. So my play I'm going to go with is Patrick Mahomes more than 284.5 passing yards. He had a down week last week, but a week before that, he had over 400 passing yards. Again, Travis Kelce's healthy. I think he's going to get over 80 plus passing yards and mix it throughout the rest of the wide receivers.
I like that. I think that's a good call. I think it's going to be a high scoring game. I think there's going to be a lot of passing yards from both sides, but I'm actually looking at a running back in this one. So I do think the Eagles are going to win the game at home. If it was reversed, the Eagles are at home, I would probably pick them.
It's at KC.
Yeah. So I'm going with the Chiefs to win this one at home. Close game, should be exciting. Another primetime one that's finally good. Like you mentioned earlier in the show, Logan, this is actually a good primetime one. So excited about that. I like DeAndre Swift more than 12.2 fantasy points. He's 7th overall in fantasy running back scoring for the season, really having a big breakout year as that number one back for the Eagles. He has double-digit fantasy points all but 2 games, been really consistent. Chiefs are 5th against the pass, but they've allowed 115-plus rushing yards 4 straight games. So I think they're going to do a little better against the pass than the run in this matchup. So I think Swift could have a big showing here. Got a few more questions we can get to before we got to get out of here, Logan. We actually got to all the games this week. A lot of fun talking about all of them and all our favorite pick 'em plays. Again, don't forget to go to rtsports.com, click on that daily link, and at the top, you'll see all those pick 'em options. So put our knowledge to good use. Hopefully we can help you out, win some money on our site. Okay, another question, Logan. Gabe the Babe. Give up Kenneth Walker and Mark Andrews for Bijan and Kincaid. He already has Kelsey, though.
Yeah, I would probably substitute maybe Kincaid for someone else. I do like getting Robinson in that deal. Maybe get an upgrade instead of Kincaid with that because you already found it tied in with Kelsey.
That's true.
So I do think that is a good value getting Robinson, but I would probably substitute Kincaid in for someone else since you're going to be starting.
That's true. You're probably not going to play Kincaid unless you really want to play it safe and you want to make sure you have a good tight end on your roster if you're in a dynasty league too. But that's a good point. I do like Bijan more than Kenneth Walker the rest of the season, though, and I think he has a little more higher upside going forward. So I like doing that, and I think it's a good idea to maybe look at a different option instead of Kincaid, though. Maybe get a better receiver that could help you there or something along those lines. All right, then next question was, so then maybe flex Singletary if Nico is limited all week. Yeah, I'm good with that if Nico's limited all week. But if Nico is getting in practice and playing well, I think that I would play him because I think he has a higher ceiling personally because he's had some big games. Logan, what do you think?
Yeah, I feel perfectly fine with that. I think Nico is more of a hit or miss. And they've also just been spreading the ball out a lot to the wide receivers. I mean, you got Noah Brown entering the mix now. Tank Dell has had several great weeks. So Nico Collins isn't the dominant number one option we kind of saw in the first couple of weeks. I think all 3 of those wide receivers are kind of even for fantasy purposes. I would still go Nico over those other 2, but I like Singletary if Pierce is out.
Okay, another trade question. A lot of trade questions. I never get any trades in my leagues. How come I'm not in these leagues? Come on. Would you trade Saquon for Rashad White and Deebo Samuel? Rest of my roster is Swift, Warren, Hunt, CD, Ridley, D-Hop, Gate.
I think I am saying yes just because the Giants' offense is just a mess, and I think they don't find the end zone as much anymore as they did at the beginning. So I'm going to say yes to that trade.
I agree with that. I would make the trade as well. I think you're getting upgraded at receiver also. I think Debo could be a legit number 2 going forward. So I like that. I would do that trade. I don't trust Saquon much going forward, and Rachaad White's been really good. We can get to one more question before we got to get out of here. I have Pacheco and Swift on the same team. Should I play them both or bench either of them for Javonte Williams or White? I'm not big on Pacheco this week, so I might bench him for White personally. I like Williams too. I think Pacheco, Williams, and White are really close, but I would probably play White over Pacheco and go with Swift.
That game with the Chiefs.
All right, Logan, thanks for coming on the show as always. And thanks to everybody out there for interacting with us. A lot of fun today. Ton of questions. Good luck to everybody in their games this week. Again, thanks so much for joining me, Logan. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on, Jeff.
Good luck to everybody in week 11. Have a great week. This has been Jeff Paur with RealTime Fantasy Sports.